A little bit of delay there. I forgot to turn on a light, so I had to run over there and turn it on real quick after I punched the record button. So apologize for that. And welcome and thanks for joining us on our Friday night Bible study. This is for Friday, March 28th, 2025.
There and turn on the light.
What was that about turning on the light?
You said to apologize for that, so I was apologizing for you.
Well, okay, I wasn't telling you to. I was just saying I'm apologizing to people for starting the recording and then not saying anything for a bit, and that was why. So, and we do have, this is the end of the month, and this is the 1 month out of the year when we do two sermon presentations in the same month because we did one on the first.
And morning, I'm feeling a little snarky, so I don't promise to behave.
So,
I may knock out on you and start snoring, but
well, you've done that before, so the going to sleep part, not the snoring part. Snoring part. Anyway, um, as I was about to say, we do have a sermon presentation ready to present tomorrow, and we'll put that up in the group to be available at 11 Central Time tomorrow. And well, I'm me. I think I do stuff well, so I think it's a pretty good sermon presentation. But at any rate, we do have one ready, and we will have that available on the group tomorrow.
I have a question. Did you read it to me?
Yes, I read it to you.
I don't remember.
You when I read you the title, you wanted to know if I was going to talk about that case in Massachusetts.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay.
That I remember.
Well, we had a couple of interesting events at our house this week.
You did?
Yeah. Last week I mentioned that the car that my wife inherited from her dad, the key wasn't working in the lock, and I called over a locksmith and he rebuilt that lock and made it where the keys would work again. And we got it started and let it run for a bit while he was here, but he had to use a battery pack to start it. And I went out, I think it was early this week on Monday, and tried to start it and turned the key to on, and nothing came up. No lights, no dinging, no nothing. It was totally dead. So, okay. Well, I went out and I did the shopping and all that. But then we went to the medical supplier to pick something up, and he wasn't there. And so I couldn't talk to him about it. And the guy who was there couldn't figure out from what he had there what he had done and if there was anything for us. So he says, "You're going to have to come back tomorrow." I said, "Well, okay." Well, I did the shopping, but I forgot some things. So on Tuesday, I went back out again. And I went there, and well, he didn't have it in the ladies' color. He had it in the man's color. Did we mind him ordering it in the man's color? Well, it's a light purple and a blue. And I'm like, well, no, I don't think we care that much about the color. So we got that on order. I'll have to pick that up.
Well,
What'd you say?
you have other ways of telling if I'm a man or a woman than looking at the color of my mask.
Well, probably, but
You're changing my diapers, so
yeah. Well, he had ordered the other color, and it was on back order. They didn't have it, but they did have the blue one in stock. And I said, "Well, yeah, let's get the one that's in stock because the one she's using is wearing out and she needs it replaced." So then I figured while I was out, I'd go ahead and replace the battery on that car. So I went to I won't name the brand, but I went to a particular national auto parts chain, and the guy looked it up, and well, there was a whole bunch of cars of that make and model, all indicated by a two-letter suffix. And I asked him, was that going to make a difference in which battery it takes? So he looked several of them up, and they all said the same battery, Type 51. All right. So I said, well, okay, let's go ahead and get that. So we looked at the options, and he went back and got one that matched what I had selected and sold to me, and I had to pay an extra on the cord charge because I didn't have the battery with me yet. I hadn't taken the old one out. So we put the battery in the back of my car. I came home. I went to change it out, and I cleaned everything up in there. I brought it has a plastic pan that it fits in that sits on top of a metal brace. I brought that in and got it real good and clean. And then I put the battery down in there. Well, the posts were backwards. And on modern cars, the battery cable doesn't just come up kind of hanging loose, and you can kind of put it anywhere you want to. They're tied down, and they're a particular length, and you really can't reverse them to get the positive on the positive and the negative on the negative. They won't reach. So after I turned it around the other way, but then I had to reach over the top of the battery, and I still couldn't make it work. So I didn't even take anything off that battery, the post cover or anything like that. I just put it back in my car along with the old one, took it back to that same auto parts store and said, well, here's what I found. And it was a different guy that serviced me that time, and he looked at it and he said, oh, well, I can go get the right battery for that. I mean, he didn't have to look anything up. He just saw what it was, saw the posts were backwards, and says, I know what you need. Went back and got it and brought it out. It was not as high value a product as the one I had selected. So I got a little money back plus the cord charge back. And then I took it and put it in the car and started it up and moved it. I hadn't moved it before. Swept the driveway underneath of it and then moved it back into place. So that much is done. Also on Monday, I got online and I ordered a wheelchair ramp. My wife has not left the house since sometime last year, and part of the reason is it's too exhausting for her to walk through the door and down to the car. She would like to be able to ride in the wheelchair right out to the car door. And in order to do that, we needed a ramp. So I looked them up online and found one that according to somebody, I needed a 10-foot one. I found some 6-foot ones online, but then I found a 7-foot one. I thought, well, 7 feet's probably just a little bit better than 6 feet, so how about we go with that? So I ordered it, and it arrived yesterday, and I got out and opened up the box and got it all unwrapped. It comes folded up 2 ways, so that it's 1/4 the size of what it is when it's laid out and ready to use. So it took a while to get everything unpacked and all the wrappings out from around it. And I set it down and it wouldn't lay flat. It stopped at an angle. And I'm like, is this how it's supposed to be? But then I looked at it. Well, it's got side rails on it to keep the wheelchair from rolling off the side of it while you're carrying somebody down. It's a safety measure. And those are at an open angle. So, okay, that's not the way they intended this to work. So I brought my phone out, and the camera didn't want to work, so I had to restart the phone to get the camera to work. And then I took 3 pictures. One of the overall so they could see how it wasn't flat, and then one up close so they could see the hinge and the edges. And then over to one side, the serial number sticker was on it. I got a good picture of that. I went in, got online with the company that built it, and they had a chat feature, so I started the chat and got on with somebody right away. And he wanted to know my order number. Well, I did have to look that up and get it to him, but it didn't take long. But I also asked him, can I upload pictures, and he told me how. So then I uploaded those 3 pictures and told him what the problem was. And so I've gotten a message back from them that says, we're sorry that you had this problem. We're sending it to our technical team. They'll be with you in 2 to 3 days. So the ramp is sitting out there. I can't put it in place because then the screen door won't close. So when we go to use it, I'll have to open the screen door, put it up in place, use it. That'll hold the screen door open so we won't be fighting that as we roll the wheelchair out. And then I'll have to set it back down so the screen door will close. So such is life. Little irritations. Lots of stuff to do. And then my wife said she heard somebody outside messing around, and well, I don't know what was going on, but I did go out to check, and the wind had blown the box that ramp came in across the street into our neighbor's driveway. So I went out there and brought it back, and I put all the packaging back inside of it. I'd thrown it away because I wasn't aware it was a problem. And I thought, well, they may want me to ship it back to them, and in which case I need all this stuff. So I put it in the box, and then I put some stuff on top of the box to keep it from blowing away. So it's got more stuff in it. It's not a lot of weight, but the weight on top of it should hold it in place so it doesn't go blowing across to the neighbor's driveway again. And that's how our weeks go around here. So
We're tired. Things are kind of slow and not much going on.
yeah, well, anyway.
Especially when you can't get up out of your chair. You're stuck in the bedroom for months and months and months.
Yeah. Well, anyway.
The husband checks to see if you're breathing.
What'd you say?
You fall asleep and your husband has to check to see if you're breathing.
Well, yeah, she went to sleep yesterday and she slept and slept and slept and slept. So at one point I went in there and made sure she was still breathing before I left the room because she slept unusually long. She woke up at about 10:45 and I looked at her CPAP machine and it had run since noon yesterday for 7.8 hours between noon and 10:45. So I don't know.
Long time.
Did you sleep at all during the night?
No.
Okay, I didn't think so. Got your sleep yesterday. Of course, that means that right now is about time for you to go to sleep again. It's been 12 hours since you went to sleep before, so we'll see. Well, it's time for us to get started. Let me adjust this here. It's not pointing where I usually have it. We did the sermon presentation. I took the computer in so that I could read it to my wife, and I bring it in here and set it down. I don't very carefully aim it. So now we've got it aimed like I want it. So let's bow our heads and we'll begin. Our Father in heaven, thank you for the week that has passed. Thank you for the joys, the victories, the trials, and the troubles, because we believe that all of these can have an impact on our character development, and that's what we believe is important, because we would ultimately like to spend eternity with you, and we know that in order for that to happen, we need to have that character development. We want to use our study of the Word today to encourage us and to aid us in that journey. And we know for that to happen, we need the direction and help of the Holy Spirit. We might see you clearly in the faulty portrayals that the Bible authors have put down. Send the Spirit toward that end for each person listening, we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Now, we ran over a little bit last week, trying to get to the end of a chapter and the end of a particular point in our story. And because of the time, we ended somewhere, and we didn't really take a lot of time to talk about it. And I would like to, because it is a very poignant moment in Old Testament history. And so we have our last chapter, 2 Samuel 18, open down at the end. And you may recall that the son of the priest, Ahimaaz, went running after Joab had sent somebody else, an Ethiopian, to carry the news about Absalom's death. and the victory of David's forces over the rebel forces. And the Ethiopian took the typical route. Ahimaaz kind of knew a shortcut, so he got there first. And he told the king, "Oh, the good news, you've won, your forces have prevailed." And, well, David, okay, that's nice, but what about my son? And Ahimaaz is like, "Uh-oh, well, I saw a big commotion, but I didn't know what was going on." Well, that was probably a lie, but anyway, that's what he said, because he didn't want to tell the king the truth. Well, then the Ethiopian came. Well, it was his obligation as the messenger sent by Joab to tell the truth. And if you look right at the top there, David asks him about Absalom. And the Ethiopian replied, "May all of your enemies, my lord the king, both now and in the future, share the fate of that young man." Now, that's a very diplomatic wording and kind of a roundabout way of saying the truth, but it did communicate it to David. And then we read this last verse of the chapter, or in Hebrew, the first verse of the next chapter. The king was overcome with emotion. He went up to the room over the gateway and burst into tears. And as he went, he cried, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." These are words of great grief, and they communicate the love David had for his son. And when you read this and you get this sense, you think back to the time when Absalom killed Amnon. And you think, if David has this over his second-born son, the one who killed, or third-born son technically, and the one who killed his firstborn son, what reaction did he have over his firstborn son, even though his firstborn son had committed the heinous act of raping his half-sister? And we don't get that. We only get this here. And I think there's a political reason for this, because it's going to put David at odds with Joab. I mean, Joab's the one who actually killed him, or actually had him killed. He put the darts in him, but then his men had to finish the job because the darts apparently didn't work. The darts, the javelins, whatever. At any rate, this is David's reaction. And years ago, I prepared a sermon focused on this verse and a neat little fact that joins this. And I would open that sermon with the poetic line, and I can't even attribute to whose poem it was, but it says, "Of all sad words of tongue or pen, the saddest, these it might have been." And that would be my introduction into this verse, which is a description of some very sad words. But then there's another passage that I would go to for sad words, and that is the mourning of Jesus over Jerusalem on his way in his discussions with them, when he said, "O Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those who were sent to you, how often I would have gathered your people together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing." And I see a relationship between the emotions described here, in that David loved his son Absalom and longed for him, and was totally heartbroken when he couldn't keep him. Jesus loved the chosen people of God, the Israelites. But as he looked at the city in its current condition, he knew that the majority of the people there would not accept him and therefore could not be healed, restored, and ultimately saved. And he expressed his sadness over that issue. Now, the other thing that I linked this story in with is that this passage earlier, we read about it, David had to cross over the brook Kidron, the valley next to Jerusalem there, in order to get to the Mount of Olives, in order to travel on to Mahanaim, where all these events took place. Jesus, the night he was betrayed, left Jerusalem, left the upper room, and crossed the same Kidron Valley and went to the Mount of Olives. And in his case, like David, who was concerned about his son Absalom, Jesus was concerned about the people of this world. Now, then all of a sudden the story flips and they become opposites. You see, David won the battle that faced him as he left Jerusalem, but he lost the son he longed for. As Jesus went out, the human race was heavy on his heart. He was worried about that. Now, he also faced a battle, and he lost it. They arrested him in the garden and took him back to Jerusalem, tried him, and executed him. So he lost the battle. But in so doing, he won those that were heavy on his heart. Whereas David won the battle but lost the one that was heavy on his heart. So that is the basis of that sermon. And of course, to fill it out then, I told a little bit of the story of Amnon and Absalom and Joab and all the characters that get involved in this story so that they have an idea why Joab felt like it was appropriate for him, despite the king's decree, to murder the crown prince. So, that's something that I've taken away from this passage for a long time, and I think it is one of the most poignant passages in the Old Testament, and very close to the kind of poignancy that we read in Jesus' mourning over the people of Israel that we read about in the New Testament. So, this has now happened, and we go on with the story. Oh, by the way, this is interesting. You'll notice that this version and the NIV, I've looked it up, both say died instead of you. The King James Bible says died for you. And I tried to look that up and see what Hebrew phrase might have led the King James translators to say for you. Because that does kind of relate to Jesus dying for us when after he went to across the Kidron Valley and up to the Mount of Olives. But my Young's Analytical Concordance does not include that text under the word for. Has a few words out of the Old Testament for, and a lot of words out of the New Testament for, but not that one. So I couldn't look that up. I looked up both died Oh, well, that's interesting. My phone is connecting up and showing me that I'm getting texts. We'll have to talk about that later. So, and that threw me off my train of thought there. I'm sorry, what was I just saying?
You threw me off.
I'm sorry. Well,
I was listening. I was listening.
oh, I was talking about that term for you. So I looked up both. Well, in the King James, it's thee. I looked up thee. Well, that didn't help much. I looked up die. Well, it's just a traditional word for die. So that is included in there, but it didn't tell me what the word between is or how the King James.
Why you
I was talking, so I didn't hear most of that.
DIE or DYE?
Die. Would to God that I had died instead of you or for you.
Oh,
And I was trying to get insight into the difference in the modern translation saying instead of where the King James says for you.
okay.
In the context, and that may be where the modern translations get from, they look at the context and instead makes more sense than for. Or rather, I had died and you had lived and become the king than for this to happen this way. At any rate, word soon reached Joab that the king was weeping and mourning for Absalom. Footnote A is probably going to talk about the differences in verse divisions between the Hebrew and yeah, that's exactly what it's doing in the Hebrew text. And quite frankly, I don't see what the significance of that is because the division of the Bible into chapters and verses took place, started at any rate, in the Latin. So it doesn't come from the Hebrew. And so whatever we did in the Latin got imposed on the Hebrew at some point. And so they decided to do it a little bit differently. Oh, what's the significance to that? I guess is, this puts that in there. Most versions that I have read don't even come up with that. So, at any rate, reading it again, word soon reached Joab that the king was weeping and mourning for Absalom. As all the people heard of the king's deep grief for his son, the joy of that day's victory was turned into deep sadness. They crept back into the town that day as though they were ashamed and had deserted in battle. The king covered his face with his hands and kept on crying, "Oh, my son Absalom! Oh, Absalom, my son, my son!" And then Joab went to the king's room and said to him, "We saved your life today and the lives of your sons, your daughters, and your wives and concubines, yet you act like this, making us feel ashamed of ourselves." Can there be any statement more narcissistic than Joab's attempt to turn this around in David, make David feel like it was wrong for him to mourn for his son? And to base it on, we saved your life. I'm the important one here. You need to listen to me and do what I say.
Well, now this is a new concept, Autumn.
What?
I remember in school being taught that David was in the wrong for mourning the loss of his son.
I don't know that I've ever heard that said, but well, Joab certainly thought he was in the wrong for it, and he certainly tears into him here. But as I read the way he says it, it comes across to me as exceptionally narcissistic and a kind of a case of gaslighting.
Well, you may be right.
How dare you turn this day of joy and victory into a day of mourning by being concerned about the son who tried to supplant you?
You may be right that um, he he was being chided for thinking of his own grief and himself rather than
Yeah.
the people.
Well, let's read on because Joab isn't done.
Taught in school that uh, David was in the wrong because he was the king and he had to show support for the people despite his own feelings.
Well, that's certainly the case that Joab is going to make here. You seem to love those who hate you and hate those who love you. You have made it clear today that your commanders and troops, the people I'm in charge of, mean nothing to you. It seems that if Absalom had lived and all of us had died, you would be pleased. Now go out there and congratulate your troops, for I swear by the Lord that if you don't go out, not a single one of them will remain here tonight. Well, he may be exaggerating things. There might be some truth in what he was saying, but at any rate, then you will be worse off than ever before. So this is Joab's attempt to control David and to break him out of his funk. So the king went out and took his seat at the town gate, and as the news spread throughout the town that he was there, everyone went to him. Meanwhile, the Israelites who had supported Absalom fled to their homes. And throughout all the tribes of Israel, there was much discussion and argument going on. The people were saying, "The king rescued us from our enemies and saved us from the Philistines, but Absalom chased him out of the country. Now, Absalom, whom we anointed to rule over us, is dead. Why not ask David to come back and be our king again?" Then King David sent Zadok and Abiathar, the priests, to say to the elders of Judah, "Why are you the last ones to welcome back the king into his palace? For I have heard that all Israel is ready. You are my relatives, my own tribe, my own flesh and blood. So why are you the last ones to welcome back the king?" And David told them to tell Amasa, "Since you are my own flesh and blood, like Joab, may God strike me and even kill me if I do not appoint you as commander of my army in his place." So at this point, Joab has made himself such a stench in David's nostrils that David is appointing somebody else in his place, Amasa. And we've read about Amasa earlier in this story. So
I don't have a Bible in front of me. Joab didn't take that too well, did he?
no, he didn't. We'll get there. Then Amasa convinced all the men of Judah, and they responded unanimously. They sent word to the king, "Return to us and bring back all who are with you." So the king started back to Jerusalem, and when he arrived at the Jordan River, the people of Judah came to Gilgal to meet him and escort him across the river. Shimei, son of Gera, the man from Bahurim in Benjamin, hurried across with the men of Judah to welcome King David. 1,000 other men from the tribe of Benjamin were with him, including Ziba, the chief servant of the house of Saul, and Ziba's 15 sons and 20 servants. They rushed down to the Jordan to meet the king. They crossed the shallows of the Jordan to bring the king's household across the river, helping him in every way they could. Now, these two names that get specifically meant here, Shimei and Ziba. Shimei is the one who cursed the king and threw up stones and rocks in their direction as they were leaving Jerusalem and saying, "God is repaying you for all the blood of the house of Saul that you shed." Ziba, meanwhile, the servant of Saul, had been assigned to watch Mephibosheth. He came and brought a whole bunch of provisions and donkeys for the king as David was leaving Jerusalem. David asked him about Mephibosheth, who was his ward and whom he was supposed to take care of. He said, "Oh, well, Mephibosheth's staying in Jerusalem because he thinks he's going to get to be king now." That's what Ziba said. It was a lie, but he said it. So these two people of questionable repute have run to the Jordan to help escort the king across and bring him back to Jerusalem. As the king was about to cross the river, Shimei fell down before him. "My lord the king, please forgive me," he pleaded. "Forget this terrible thing your servant did when you left Jerusalem. May the king put it out of his mind. I know how much I sinned. That's why I have come here today, the very first person in all Israel, to greet my lord the king. footnote C there, in the house of Joseph, okay, as opposed to the house of Judah. And eventually the divided tribes will be considered Judah and Joseph after an extent, or Ephraim, the son of Joseph, who was the most prominent. Israel sometimes gets referred to in the words of the prophets as Ephraim.
In some boy was, and then I'll forget it.
Now this is interesting because I didn't notice that. We've read about Amasa going to convince the men of Judah. Well, David sent people too, and he told them to tell his own people this thing, and to tell Amasa, I'm going to make you the commander of my army in place of Joab. And then the Hebrew says, then he convinced all the men of Judah, and they responded unanimously. And the footnote down there says, well, it might be David, not Amasa, because all the Hebrew says is he, and the antecedent isn't entirely clear there. So we got down here to Shimei apologizing to the king, confessing that what he did was sinful. He shouldn't have done it. And I wanted to be the first person out of the house of Joseph to greet the king. Then Abishai, son of Zeruiah, that would be Joab's brother, said, Shimei should die, for he cursed the Lord's anointed king. Well, he'd already wanted to do that. Now he's trying again. Who asked your opinion, you sons of Zeruiah? David exclaimed. Why have you become my adversary today? This is not a day for execution, for today I am once again the king of Israel. Footnote D might be interesting. My prosecutor. Okay. Then, turning to Shimei, David vowed, your life will be spared. That's not a permanent injunction. Maybe David had intended it to be, but we'll find out later it's not a permanent injunction. Now Mephibosheth, Saul's grandson, came down from Jerusalem to meet the king. He had not cared for his feet, trimmed his beard, or washed his clothes since the day the king left Jerusalem. Remember, he's crippled in his feet, so his feet probably required some kind of special care. And he hadn't been doing that. He hadn't shaved, hadn't washed up. And we don't know how long the king was gone, but, a week maybe. That's how long he's been left unkempt. And maybe that's because Ziba has been doing what he's doing and not helping Mephibosheth as he was supposed to. Why didn't you come with me, Mephibosheth? The king asked him. Mephibosheth replied, my lord the king, my servant Ziba deceived me. I told him, saddle my donkey so I can go with the king, for as you know, I am crippled. Ziba has slandered me by saying that I refuse to come. But I know that my lord the king is like an angel of God, so do what you think is best. All my relatives and I could expect only death from you, my lord, but instead you have honored me by allowing me to eat at your own table. What more can I ask? You've said enough, David replied. I've decided that you and Ziba will divide your land equally between you. Give him all of it, Mephibosheth said. I'm content just to have you safely back again, my lord the king. And we talked about this in our sermon presentation several months back, about what's going on here. And there are probably things that were said that aren't included. But Mephibosheth argues his case. Ziba lied about me. Why would David then say, divide the land equally? It was originally Mephibosheth entirely. Ziba was only the caretaker. And I guess perhaps David was kind of between a rock and a hard place, so to speak. Because you recall that when Ziba told him that Mephibosheth had stayed in Jerusalem hoping to become king, that David had said to him, okay, you get all his land. So now he takes that back, but he didn't take it back all the way. He says, the two of you will divide it equally. Now, maybe this is because, this is just a thought that came to me just now. Maybe David is seeing that it's not appropriate for him to leave Mephibosheth in Ziba's care. Ziba has demonstrated he's not trustworthy. He can't be trusted with Mephibosheth's care. So David's going to have to make other arrangements. He does not intend to totally disinherit Ziba. Ziba will need land for him and his family to survive over time. So he says, well, there's plenty of land there. Mephibosheth can have half and Ziba can have half. That way both are cared for. And it doesn't say he named somebody else. But then Mephibosheth says, give him all of it. But we don't get any indication that that's what happened. That's just Mephibosheth expressing, in a sense, a humility before the king and an understanding he's already gotten way more than he deserved. And, he's not going to be selfish about it. If he wants it all, let him have it. Well, the king's probably not going to do that. It doesn't tell us because this is all we read, what the people said. Barzillai of Gilead had come down from Rogelim to escort the king across the Jordan. He was very old, 80 years of age, and very wealthy. Now, we don't know how old David was at this time, but I'm guessing around 60. He died at 70. So, he was in that range, but Barzillai was clearly older than that. He was also, it says, very wealthy. He was the one who had provided food for the king during his stay in Mahanaim. Come across with me and live in Jerusalem, the king said to Barzillai. I'll take care of you there. No, he replied, I am far too old to go with the king to Jerusalem. I am 80 years old today, and I can no longer enjoy anything. Food and wine are no longer tasty, and I cannot hear the singers as they sing. I would only be a burden to my lord the king. Just go across the Jordan River with the king. Just to go across the Jordan River with the king is all the honor I need. Then let me return again to die in my own town where my father and mother are buried. But here is your servant, my son Kimham. Let him go with my lord the king and receive whatever you want to give him. Good, the king agreed. Kimham will go with me, and I will help him in any way you would like, and I will do for you anything you want. So all the people crossed the Jordan with the king. After David had blessed Barzillai and kissed him, Barzillai returned to his own home. The king then crossed over to Gilgal, taking Kimham with him. All the troops of Judah and half the troops of Israel escorted the king on his way. But all the men of Israel complained to the king. The men of Judah stole the king and didn't give us the honor of helping take you, your household, and all your men across the Jordan. Does this sound like they're wearing a chip on their shoulders and being exceptionally easily offended? It does to me. The men of Judah replied, the king is one of our own kinsmen. Why should this make you angry? We haven't eaten any of the king's food or received any special favors. But there are 10 tribes in Israel, the others replied, so we have 10 times as much right to the king as you do. What right do you have to treat us with such contempt? Weren't we the first to speak of bringing him back to be our king again? The argument continued back and forth, and the men of Judah spoke even more harshly than the men of Israel. More Israelite men behaving badly, I guess. Being childish and There's a word I want, and I can't think of it. Easily offended, but there's another term I want that says something different. I just can't think of it. So, guess we'll move on here. There happened to be a troublemaker there, wherever there is, named Sheba, son of Bichri, a man from the tribe of Benjamin. Sheba blew a ram's horn and began to chant. Now, this may be related to the story we just read about the contention between the people of Judah and the people of the 10 tribes.
Or is it Kafkaesque?
No, that's not what I was thinking. There happened to be a troublemaker there named Sheba, son of Bichri, a man from the tribe of Benjamin. Sheba blew a ram's horn and began to chant, "Down with the dynasty of David. We have no interest in the son of Jesse. Come on, you men of Israel, back to your homes." So all the men of Israel deserted David and followed Sheba, son of Bichri. But the men of Judah stayed with their king and escorted him from the Jordan River to Jerusalem. So, yeah, when you read that second verse there, it becomes pretty clear. This is all about this little argument they had over who gets to bring the king across the river. And now this Sheba has used that as an excuse to try to divide the country. And it's going to divide at this point along the very lines that the country was divided. Can we hear you now?
I need some water.
Okay. Let me pause this briefly here. Just a moment. Okay. A brief pause there to take care of something. And when she said she wanted water, it means she wanted distilled water in the humidification chamber of her CPAP because she's planning to take a nap. And with her long nap yesterday, it had gone dry on her, so I needed to fill that for her. So we've done that. So what I was saying was that the division here between the men of Judah and the 10 tribes is the very division that will come up again after the reign of Solomon. So there's history behind it that we're reading right here. And Sheba apparently wants to become king of the 10 tribes and separate them from Judah at this point. And so it says here, so the men of Israel deserted David and followed Sheba, son of Bichri, but the men of Judah stayed with their king and escorted him from the Jordan River to Jerusalem. When David came to his palace in Jerusalem, he took the 10 concubines he had left to look after the palace and placed them in seclusion. Their needs were provided for, but he no longer slept with them. So each of them lived like a widow until she died. That's just an indication of how rough and how male-dominated that society was. They were now considered damaged goods because Absalom had slept with them. So now David would not anymore. So he provided for them. You had food to eat and a place to sleep and all that. But they didn't have the attention of the king any longer, and apparently didn't have the attention of any other man any longer either. Then the king told Amasa, "Mobilize the army of Judah within 3 days and report back at that time." So Amasa went out to notify Judah, but it took him longer than the time he had been given. It took him more than the 3 days that David had allotted him. Then David said to Abishai, "Sheba, son of Bichri, is going to hurt us more than Absalom did. Quick, take my troops and chase after him before he gets into a fortified town where we can't reach him." So Abishai and Joab, together with the king's bodyguard and all the mighty warriors, set out from Jerusalem to go after Sheba. Now there's 2 footnotes there, Joab and bodyguard. Let's go down and look at them. So Joab's men in the Hebrew, and then the Kerethites and Pelethites in the second part of that, the king's men or bodyguard. So Abishai and Joab and all the mighty warriors set out from Jerusalem to go after Sheba. After they arrived at the great stone in Gibeon, Amasa met them. Joab was wearing his military tunic with a dagger strapped to his belt. As he stepped forward to greet Amasa, he slipped the dagger from its sheath. Or, footnote C, as he stepped forward, it fell out. Well, the point is it got out. Whether he took it out or it fell out, he's going to use it. "How are you, my cousin?" Joab said, and took him by the beard with his right hand as though to kiss him. Amasa didn't notice the dagger in his left hand, and Joab stabbed him in the stomach with it so that his insides gushed out onto the ground. Joab did not need to strike again, and Amasa soon died. Joab and his brother left Abishai left him lying there and continued after Sheba. One of Joab's young men shouted to Amasa's troops, "If you are for Joab and David, come and follow Joab." But Amasa lay in his blood in the middle of the road, and Joab's man saw that everyone was stopping to stare at him. So he pulled him off the road into a field and threw a cloak over him. With Amasa's body out of the way, everyone went on with Joab to capture Sheba, son of Bichri. Meanwhile, Sheba traveled through all the tribes of Israel and eventually came to the town of Abel Beth Maachah. All the members of his own clan, the Bichrites, assembled for battle and followed him into the town. When Joab's forces arrived, they attacked Abel Beth Maachah. They built a siege ramp against the town's fortifications and began battering down the wall. But a wise woman in the town called out to Joab, "Listen to me, Joab. Come over here so I can talk to you." As he approached, the woman asked, "Are you Joab?" "I am," he replied. So she said, "Listen carefully to your servant." "I'm listening," he said. Then she continued, "There used to be a saying, 'If you want to settle an argument, ask advice at the town of Abel.' I am one who is peace-loving and faithful in Israel, but you are destroying an important town in Israel." Footnote E, what was D? Oh yeah, a town that is a mother in Israel is how the Hebrew reads for that. "But you are destroying an important town in Israel, or a town that is a mother in Israel. Why do you want to devour what belongs to the Lord?" And Joab replied, "Believe me, I don't want to devour or destroy your town. That's not my purpose. All I want is a man named Sheba, son of Bichri, from the hill country of Ephraim, who has revolted against King David. If you hand over this one man to me, I will leave the town in peace." "All right," the woman replied, "we will throw his head over the wall to you." Then the woman went to all the people with her wise advice, and they cut off Sheba's head and threw it out to Joab. So he blew the ram's horn and called his troops back from the attack. They all returned to their homes, and Joab returned to the king at Jerusalem. Now this is an exceptionally disgusting part of the story. And to describe this woman as wise, well, it recognizes that she acted to save her city and all the people of her city. In order to do so, she had to sacrifice the one man. And unfortunately, that's a reality of human life, is that because we are so violent, because we are so broken and messed up, we engage in violence, and sometimes people have to make a choice. How many deaths do we want to have to deal with here? And I'm no fan of the theory that the fewer deaths the better necessarily, because when we're dealing with right and wrong, maybe fewer deaths allows wrong to continue, and maybe that's not the best. But here we are. This is the story. This is what happened. And notice that the narrator here does not moralize about it. He doesn't tell us whether this was good or bad. He just tells us what happened. When this woman came out and talked to Joab, found out what he wanted, why he was waging war against the city, and says, well, if we give it to him, he'll leave us. And the people of the town agreed with her, and that's what they did. Now, the other thing, and we've talked about it long ago when we did our character study on Joab, once again, he has murdered in order to maintain his position. He knows that David has named Amasa to replace him. Well, David can't replace him with Amasa if Amasa's dead. So he takes the step of murdering Amasa in order to retain his position. He will pay for this attitude with his life, but not yet. Now, Joab was the commander of the army of Israel. Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, was captain of the king's bodyguard. This Benaiah we're going to run into quite a bit. Adoniram was in charge of forced labor. Now, was that the king's fourth son? Footnote F. As in the Greek version, and see also 1 Kings 4, 6, and 5:14. The Hebrew reads Adoram, but Adoram and Adonijah might be different versions of the same name. And we know that Adoniram was the son born after Absalom there in Hebron. And so the king's son in charge of forced labor. Well, it makes sense that he would, as a prince, he would have some sort of responsibility like that. Jehoshaphat, son of Ahilud, was the royal historian. Sheba was the court secretary. Zadok and Abiathar were the priests, and Ira, a descendant of Jair, was David's personal priest, not Abiathar, who had been his personal priest earlier. So there we have a rundown of the court people of David. And I clicked that, but I don't think it read it. There we go. Chapter 21. David avenges the Gibeonites. And this is something we covered a few months back in one of our sermon presentations. There was a famine during David's reign that lasted for 3 years. So David asked the Lord about it. And the Lord said, or at least that's what the people believed, the famine has come because Saul and his family are guilty of murdering the Gibeonites. So the king summoned the Gibeonites. They were not part of Israel, but were all that was left of the nation of the Amorites. The people of Israel had sworn not to kill them, but Saul, in his zeal for Israel and Judah, had tried to wipe them out. David asked them, "What can I do for you? How can I make amends so that you will bless the Lord's people again?" Now, you're going to have to make up your own mind about this. I personally doubt that the Lord had caused this curse on the people over the Gibeonites. At the very worst, he might have lifted his protection so that the enemy could impose this on them. But given what has to happen in order for the famine to end, it makes me doubt that a loving God had anything to do with it. This is just what the people believed happened, and that's what they're writing out. So David asked them, what can they do? And, well, money can't settle this matter between us and the family of Saul, the Gibeonites replied. Neither can we demand the life of anyone in Israel. What can I do then? David asked. Just tell me and I'll do it for you. Then they replied, it was Saul who planned to destroy us, to keep us from having any place at all in the territory of Israel. So let 7 of Saul's sons be handed over to us, and we will execute them before the Lord at Gibeon in the mountain of the Lord. Or footnote A, the Hebrew reads, at Gibeah of Saul, the chosen of the Lord. 21:6 is as in the Greek version later reinterpretation of the story. All right, the king said, I will do it. The king spared Jonathan's son, Mephibosheth, who was Saul's grandson, because of the oath David and Jonathan had sworn before the Lord. But he gave them Saul's two sons, Armoni and Mephibosheth, whose mother was Rizpah, daughter of Aiah. He also gave him the 5 sons of Saul's daughter Merab, the wife of Adriel, son of Barzillai, from Meholah. The men of Gibeon executed them on the mountain before the Lord, so all 7 of them died together at the beginning of the barley harvest. Now there's a footnote there after both Mephibosheth and Merab. Mephibosheth is just going to say that it's Merab-Baal, and then as in a few Hebrew and Greek manuscripts and the Syriac version, see also 1 Samuel 18:19, most Hebrew manuscripts read Michael. And then you begin to wonder, these must have been sons of Michael by her husband after David fled from Saul. I doubt they would be David's sons. Once she despised him when he brought the ark back to Jerusalem, he no longer consorted with her. And it's unlikely that given what we know about David and his grief over Absalom, that he would have yielded up his own sons for this. So if they were Michael's rather than Merab's children, they would probably have been the sons of Paltiel. At any rate, they had asked for 7, so he gave the 2 sons of Saul that he could find. And let's see, where are we here? So he needed 5 more, and he used those 5 sons. All 7 of them died together at the beginning of the barley harvest. Now, if the Hebrew does in fact say the wife of Adriel, son of Barzillai from Meholah, it seems likely that it was Merab and not Michael, even though the Hebrew says Michael, because Michael came to David's household and essentially became a widow. Then Rizpah, daughter of Aiah, the mother of 2 of the men. Now recall, this is the same Rizpah over whom Abner and Ishbosheth had a falling out. And Abner decided to throw his support to David and got himself murdered by Joab because Joab knew he was a better man than he, and he didn't want that competition. This is the same Rizpah. She was the mother of 2 of the men. She spread burlap on a rock and stayed there the entire harvest season. She prevented the scavenger birds from tearing at their bodies during the day and stopped wild animals from eating them at night. When David learned what Rizpah, Saul's concubine, had done, he went to the people of Jabesh Gilead and retrieved the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan. Recall that they felt a debt of gratitude to Saul for having saved them from Nahash, the king of the Ammonites, which ended up making David and Nahash friends. But at any rate, they felt that they ordered this debt to him. So when Saul and Jonathan died, they went into the territory of the Philistines and recovered the bodies and brought them back to their own city and buried them there. So now, when David hears this, he goes down to them and takes the bones of Saul and Jonathan. And then it puts in here in parentheses, when the Philistines had killed Saul and Jonathan on Mount Gilboa, the people of Jabesh Gilead stole their bodies from the public square of Bethshan, where the Philistines had hung them. So David obtained the bones of Saul and Jonathan, as well as the bones of the men the Gibeonites had executed. Then the king ordered that they bury the bones in the tomb of Kish, Saul's father, at the town of Zelah in the land of Benjamin, After that, God ended the famine in the land. Now, notice, if God was involved here in some way in ending the famine, it didn't happen when these men died. And I think we pointed this out in our sermon presentation. It happened when the people demonstrated honor for the men who had been executed by properly burying them. Now, I am of the skeptical, cynical sort that says once somebody's dead, who cares? It is for the people who are still alive that we properly treat the dead. It's not for the dead. They don't know anything about it. They have no part in it. Doesn't matter to them what happens to their bodies. But it does matter to the people who love them, who are left behind mourning them. And that is why we show respect for the bodies of the dead. So the respect being shown here in properly burying all these bones, both Saul and Jonathan, and the bones of the men who had just been executed, was to show respect to the relatives and friends left behind who are missing these men. Then the king ordered that they bury the bones in the tomb of Kish, Saul's father, at the town of Zelah in the land of Benjamin. And like we say, after that, God ended the famine in the land. Once again, the Philistines were at war with Israel, and when David and his men were in the thick of battle, David became weak and exhausted. Ishbi-benob was a descendant of the giants. His bronze spearhead weighed more than 7 pounds, and he was armed with a new sword. He had cornered David and was about to kill him. But Abishai, son of Zeruiah, came to David's rescue and killed the Philistine. Then David's men declared, "You are not going out to battle with us again. Why risk snuffing out the light of Israel?" Ishbi-benob, the descendant of the giants, footnote D. Let's go look at that. A descendant of the Rapha, which is also in chapter 21, which we're reading, verses 18, 20, and 22. So that will count for several times. And then the 7 pounds, that's just 300 shekels. So at this point, David is getting quite old, possibly 65 or more, and he hasn't got the stamina for battle that he used to have. And so his men say, you shouldn't be coming out with us to battle anymore. After this, there was another battle against the Philistines at Gob. As they fought, Sibbecai from Hushah killed Saph, another descendant of the giants. So there's the other reference to that, and that's going to continue. During another battle at Gob, Elnathan, son of Jair from Bethlehem, killed the brother of Goliath of Gath. The handle of his spear was as thick as a weaver's beam. Footnote G on Goliath of Gath, as in the parallel text at 1 Chronicles 20, verse 5, Hebrew reads, killed Goliath of Gath. Well, if it's the same Goliath, he couldn't have killed him because David took care of that many years earlier. But at any rate, in another battle with the Philistines at Gath, they encountered a huge man with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in all, who was also a descendant of the giants. But when he defied and taunted Israel, he was killed by Jonathan, the son of David's brother Shimea. So another one of David's nephews in this case. And we just crossed 2 footnotes there, H and I. H, as in the parallel text, the Hebrew reads a Midianite. And then the I, as in the parallel text in Chronicles, the Hebrew reads Shimei, a variant spelling of Shimea. Okay, so these 4 Philistines were descendants of the giants of Gath, but David and his warriors killed them. That's not really telling us anything about God. It's telling us about the condition of humanity at this point in history. looking at the time, yeah, we have time to cover this. David sang this song to the Lord on the day the Lord rescued him from all his enemies and from Saul. So this is probably many years earlier. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my Savior. My God is my rock, in whom I find protection. He is my shield, the power that saves me, and my place of safety. He is my refuge, my Savior, the one who saves me from violence. Well, if he wanted to be saved from violence, maybe he could have avoided violence of his own. But then again, maybe he couldn't have, given the time and place that he lived. I called on the Lord, who is worthy of praise, and he saved me from my enemies. The waves of death overwhelmed me, floods of destruction swept over me. The grave wrapped its ropes around me. Death laid a trap in my path. Footnote A, probably going to tell us that the Hebrew there is Hades. Sheol. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. But Sheol is the place of the dead, or the grave. But in my distress I cried out to the Lord. Yes, I cried to my God for help. He heard me from his sanctuary. My cry reached his ears. Then the earth quaked and trembled. The foundations of the heavens shook. They quaked because of his anger. Smoke poured from his nostrils. Fierce flames leaped from his mouth. Glowing coals blazed forth from him. He opened the heavens and came down. Dark storm clouds were beneath his feet. Mounted on a mighty angelic being, he flew. Footnote B, a cherub. Yeah, okay. That's kind of what I thought. Now, these descriptions here, it talks about God's anger, which is certainly how the Hebrews perceived of God, which was not that different from the polytheistic beliefs of the people around them. The Greeks portrayed gods at war with each other, and so all these terrible things going on earth were the result of the gods fighting with each other up there in the overland, wherever they believed the gods were. So that helped in their mind to explain all the distress and trouble that took place on earth. So the Hebrews were not that far removed from that, although they were monotheistic in their beliefs. But then, everything got attributed to just the one God. So if terrible things were happening, well, that's because God's angry. That's how they coped with the nonsense going around them. So when the earth quakes and trembled, well, that's God being angry. Now, this next description, verses 9 and 10. Smoke poured from his nostrils, fierce flames leaped from his mouth, glowing coals blazed forth from him. He opened the heavens and came down, dark storm clouds were beneath his feet. Well, there's elsewhere in the Old Testament we'll come across where God is described as a consuming fire. Not a combusting fire, a consuming fire. A fire that consumes sin. And so this description of fierce flames and smoke is probably an accurate description of what God would appear like to we mortal humans. But then who's going to dwell with that burning? Well, he whose heart is pure. That's who. So we don't need to be afraid of a description like this of God. Now, in our current condition, yes, we do, because it consumes sin, and we're all bound up with sin currently. So when he opens the heavens and comes down, dark storm clouds are beneath his feet. That hides us from his glory that would destroy us. So these dark storm clouds, David describes them here as the storm clouds, but essentially they're hiding God from us for our protection. Mounted on a cherubim, he flew, soaring on the wings of the wind. footnote C, after the word soaring. As in some Hebrew manuscripts, see also Psalm 18:10. Other Hebrew manuscripts read appearing. Now, Psalm 18:10. I'm going to look that up over here just to see if, in fact, there is similarity between what we're reading in Psalm 18, because that seems to indicate that that's the case. And I'm just going to read some of this Psalm 18 here. I love thee, O Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer, my God, my rock, in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. And I'm reading here from the New American Standard Bible, which is not that far removed from the revised versions and the Revised Standard Version, which were not that far removed from the word-for-word thinking of the King James. The cords of death encompassed me, and the torrents of ungodliness terrified me. The cords of Sheol surrounded me, the snares of death in front. So yeah, what we're reading is pretty much a restatement of the words of Psalm 18. Now, where did we leave off? We were talking about the burning coals. At the command of the Lord. Okay, all right. Okay, we were reading the dark storm clouds beneath his feet. And then we go on, mounted on a mighty angelic being, or a cherubim, he flew, soaring on the wings of the wind. He shrouded himself in darkness, veiling his approach with dense rain clouds. Again, repetition of that description. A great brightness shone around him, and burning coals blazed forth. The Lord thundered from heaven. The voice of the Most High resounded. Coals there, footnote D, and lightning bolts. All right. Yeah. People often see God in the violence of nature. And I think we talked about that in a recent sermon presentation where I opined that, in a sense, this is God's power on display, because God, in his love and mercy, has provided the earth with plenty of energy to supply our needs and to keep us alive. And when that gets misused and misdirected, then terrible things happen. And you have tornadoes and lightning and all the destruction that goes along with these kinds of things. And that's God's power on display, but it is not his character on display. It's the character of those who are misusing the power of God in nature. You wanted to say something, or you just called up to rejoin?
I need you for a moment.
Okay, I'm going to pause again, and then we'll finish
I'm
this.
so sorry.
Okay, that little interruption is over. And we're reading here from 2 Samuel 22, which is very similar to Psalm 18. We just read about the brightness that shone around him and burning coals blazed forth. And that footnote suggests that maybe that could be rendered as lightning. The Lord thundered from heaven. The voice of the Most High resounded. He shot arrows and scattered his enemies. His lightning flashed, and they were confused. Then, at the command of the Lord, at the blast of his breath, the bottom of the sea could be seen, and the foundations of the earth were laid bare. He reached down from heaven and rescued me. He drew me out of deep waters. He rescued me from my powerful enemies, from those who hated me and were too strong for me. Now, there is value in some of this language, particularly when it talks here about the sea and the deep waters. The sea in ancient Middle East mythology was the place of the unknown and the threatening and the enemy of humanity, so to speak. So if we think of this as describing the enemy of humanity and God setting limits on him, then we can see he reached down from heaven and rescued me. He drew me out of deep waters. He rescued me from my powerful enemies, from those who hated me and were too strong for me. The enemy of humanity is not human. The enemy of humanity has greater power than we humans. So we need God to rescue us from him because he's too strong for us. They attacked me at a moment when I was in distress, but the Lord supported me. He led me to a place of safety. He rescued me because he delights in me. Now we're going to get into a bit of self-righteousness here, which we in our day don't think is entirely appropriate. It's going to sound a little bit toxic kind of thinking. The Lord rewarded me for doing right. He restored me because of my innocence. Hey, I'm a great guy here. Yeah. For I have kept the ways of the Lord. I have not turned from my God to follow evil. I followed all his regulations. I have never abandoned his decrees. I am blameless before God. I have kept myself from sin. The Lord rewarded me for doing right. He's seen my innocence. David, you're a human. Even if he wrote this before the incident with Bathsheba, he's human. He is not entirely innocent, as we have suggested. So it's a little bit inappropriate for him to be writing like this, but he's turning this toward God, so maybe God, kind of winks at his ignorance here. To the faithful, you show yourself faithful. To those with integrity, you show integrity. To the pure, you show yourself pure. But to the crooked, you show yourself shrewd. You rescue the humble, but your eyes watch the proud and humiliate them. O Lord, you are my lamp. The Lord lights up my darkness. In your strength, I can crush an army. With my God, I can scale any wall. God's way is perfect. All the Lord's promises prove true. He is a shield for all who look to him for protection. For who is God except Yahweh? Who but our God is a solid rock? God is my strong fortress, and he makes my way perfect. Well, he is in the business of healing people. And when we are healed, we quit living our old toxic coping mechanisms and start living better. So, yeah, he does. In fact, where did I read that? He makes my way perfect. Okay. Well, and the way perfect, David may have thought of that as making the path he has to trod better for him. But at any rate, he makes me as sure-footed as a deer, enabling me to stand on the mountain's heights. Makes me think maybe they didn't have mountain goats in that area because the sure-footed animal is the mountain goat. I used to live in Colorado, and we used to go out and look for the mountain goats who could run up the side, almost looked like they were running up the side of a cliff, standing on the rock and just totally sure-footed, and they didn't end up falling as a human likely would. He trains my hands for battle. He strengthens my arm to draw a bronze bow. Well, God's not in the business of violence, David. You have given me a shield of victory. Your help has made me great. Footnote E on that word help. As in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Masoretic text read, your answering. Okay, has made me great. You have made a wide path for my feet to keep them from slipping. I chased my enemies and destroyed them. I did not stop until they were conquered. I consumed them. I struck them down so they did not get up. They fell beneath my feet. Now, again, we did a sermon presentation some time ago on the vengeance psalms, and I think we did quote out of Psalm 18 in that, some of these passages. And we talked about this, and And one of the interpretations that we brought, suggested for this, is that who are our enemies? Well, our enemies are the toxic coping mechanisms that get in our way and mess us up and make us hurt the people around us. Those things are our enemies. That's what we want to be delivered from. And yes, God gives us the power to overcome them. I consumed them. I struck them down so they did not get up. They fell beneath my feet. You have armed me with strength for the battle. You have subdued my enemies under my feet. You placed my feet on their necks. I have destroyed all who hated me. They looked for help, but no one came to their rescue. They even cried to the Lord, but he refused to answer. I ground them as fine as the dust of the earth. I trampled them in the gutter like dirt. You gave me victory over my accusers. You preserved me as the ruler over nations. People I don't even know now serve me. Foreign nations cringe before me. As soon as they hear of me, they submit. They lose all their courage and come trembling from their strongholds. Now, some of this was true, that David probably controlled more territory than any of the other Israelite kings. And that was due to his prowess in battle, at least in part. Although Joab's viciousness and single-minded devotion to destruction may also have had something to do with it. The Lord lives, praise to my rock. May God, the rock of my salvation, be exalted. He is the God who pays back those who harm me. He brings down the nations under me and delivers me from my enemies. You hold me safe beyond the reach of my enemies. You save me from violent opponents. For this, O Lord, I will praise you among the nations. I will sing praises to your name. You give great victories to your king. You show unfailing love to your anointed, to David and all his descendants forever. And of course, we have discussed this, I think, in the past, to the extent that the Old Testament promises unending dynasty for David and all his descendants. That is fulfilled in Jesus Christ, whom the New Testament makes a big deal out of pointing out that he came in the line of David, both literally and figuratively. And so in Jesus now being the head of the human race for all eternity, then in that sense, David's throne is established forever. And so we ended up doing 4 chapters instead of 3 this week, and we're very near the end of the story of David. It's going to be a little bit dry probably next week because we're going to go through the lists of David's mighty men and some of those other things. But the story's going to get interesting after that once David passes away. So that is our presentation for this evening. And again, we do plan to present that sermon presentation tomorrow. And I'll give you the title, just the title, not the subtitle. False Arrest. That's going to be our sermon presentation for tomorrow. 11 Central Time. It'll be available on the group unless, Lord willing. And so until either then or next week, we say goodbye and God bless.